Listening Fanfiction presents That Time Izuku Was in a Shitty Mood by Caradwin Angratuary. Based on the manga series My Hero Academia, narrated for you by Sierra Feast. Saying that Izuku had woken up on the wrong side of the bed was the understatement of the century. In fact, given the mood that Izuku was in, he was willing to fight anybody who just summed it up as that. Izuku was in the shittiest of moods, and for once he wasn't willing to hide it. He had a shitty night anyway, couldn't get to sleep at all. Bakugo had been a piece of shit and had started a fight, and Izuku had ended up having to be the one to break it up since, apparently, he's the only one unafraid to take an exploding fist to the eye. After returning from his very long walk to and from UA to have Recovery Girl restore the vision in his left eye, he had went to collapse into bed until Kaminari blew the electricity in the dorms. Again. And who was the only ones who knew how to fix fried breakers? Yaoyorozu and Midoriya, of course. So, he had stayed up until midnight with the other, restoring the electricity themselves so that Aizawa didn't have their asses. And then what? Oh yeah, Mineta somehow clogged the toilet, and only Midoriya knew how to do that. It was one of his jobs at home, since his mother wasn't too good with handy jobs, so that took another half hour. By the time Midoriya got clean, got changed, and got back to bed, it was 2 a.m., and he only had 2 hours of sleep before he started his morning workouts. He hadn't even had a stable night of sleep, no matter what he did, how long he stared at the ceiling, or how many bargains he made with the universe. Midoriya Izuku could just not get his eyes to stay closed. It was too hot. But then it was too damn cold. The blankets were uncomfortable, but then they were perfect, but his pillow had practically turned into a rock. And he swore something was tapping against the wall somewhere in the dorm, and he couldn't help but fixate on it in the silence. He had no clue where it was, and he couldn't exactly tear through the dorms looking for it at 3 a.m. So we silently let it drive him insane all goddamn night. He somehow drifted off at 3:45, only to be woken up 15 minutes later. It only grew worse. First, he had rolled out of bed and face planted into the floor, managing to break some of his favorite merchandise and his alarm clock. After chucking the wreckage into the bin, Izuku had spent 20 minutes searching for his weights before finding them rolled under his bed. He then promptly dropped them on his foot! A loud cracking sound would have made him wince if he wasn't too busy muffling very violent curses. He had been relying on his workout to release some of the pent-up anger in his body, not wanting to be too nasty to his friends in class today, but with his injured foot and lack of sleep, his muscles were too shot to obey. Fine, today could be his break day. He'd make it up on Saturday. Izuku stalked downstairs, spotting some of his classmates cradling mugs of coffee. Izuku let out a sigh of relief. They must have made the coffee today. Maybe his luck was looking up. A good breakfast and a large beaker of coffee would wake him up. Nope. The universe wanted to fuck with him today. The coffee machine had exploded on him, impaling the palm of his hand with a large shard of glass. His cry of shock and pain had drawn his classmates into the kitchen, where they saw Izuku cradling his hand as blood soaked into his shirt. The Deku Protection Squad reacted instantly, cradling him like a child and transporting him to Recovery Girl for the second time in less than 24 hours. She then scolded him over being careful after healing his hand and then his, indeed, broken foot. When Izuku got home, there was no food in the fridge. Probably because Kaminari forgot it was his turn to go grocery shopping again, and Mineta had spilled his own mug of coffee on the shirt that Izuku had just changed into. Izuku had barely been able to change into a new school uniform and grab his homework without being late for school, and Aizawa had given him that little stare that was really starting to get on Izuku's nerves. At least he hadn't scolded him as well. Izuku wasn't sure he'd be able to stop himself from snapping back. Izuku stuck to his seat behind Bakugo, glaring hotly as the other rested his elbows on his desktop. Izuku's temper was starting to run dangerously thin. Kacha? Izuku called, hands forming into tight fists as he held eye contact with the other. Can you kindly get your elbows off my desk! Bakugo glanced back at Izuku, meeting his green eyes before his own crimson ones widened in recognition. There was no doubt about it. Deku was pissed, and Bakugo knew what that meant. It meant Bakugo was going to get out of the way of the incoming explosion of hellfire. That's what. Yup. Sorry. Bakugo didn't fight, shooting himself forward to sit properly in his desk. He sat up, stock straight, remembering every single survival lesson he had amassed throughout the years in dealing with Izuku when his temper went. Because it has happened a couple of times before, but Bakugo had only needed it to happen once for him to learn his lesson. Even without a quirk, Izuku was smart enough to put someone in the hospital if he got completely serious and too angry to think. He sat straight, hands placed firmly flat on the desktop and exactly 5 inches apart. He quickly fixed his uniform, pulling the red tie from his pocket. He always had it on hand in case this ever did happen, and tying it quickly around his neck in a perfect knot. He then sat still. Very, very still and very, very quiet. Bakugo ran through the rules in his head, making sure he remembered every detail. How to avoid enraging Deku. 1. Sit very still. Fidgeting and idle tapping noises will set him off like a bomb. 2. Make sure your outfit is perfect. Tie is knotted perfectly, sleeves folded correctly, buttons perfect. No baggy pants. 3. Stay very quiet. If you must make a noise, make it as quiet as possible and pray that it doesn't set him off. 4. Do not approach unless specifically asked to. Don't completely isolate him though. He'll notice and then get even more annoyed. 5. Listen to every request made and do not hesitate to obey them. Throw away your dignity if necessary. It's better than the emergency room. 6. If he asks to be left alone, you do it. If he asks for company, you do it, and you be the nicest little angel on the planet. 7. If he starts to rant at you, you stand there and take it. You do not argue otherwise. Agree with whatever he says unless it's completely outrageous. Then quietly and very politely object, but only if you have at least 5 solid reasons that he cannot argue against. Class 1A watched in shock as the blonde fixed himself up, the shaking of the blonde's eyes betraying his sudden spike in stress. Izuku behind him still looked murderous and slightly unhinged, but he sat very still and very quiet as he waited for class to start. Bakugo didn't move a muscle, looking like a model student from all sides. One had thought it was impossible for the blonde to not fight with someone, and hell must have frozen over because that could be the only explanation for why Bakugo looked so terrified of Izuku. So what did Class 1A do? They took a page from Bakugo's book and swiftly copied him. Ties were straightened, hands clasped or spread evenly, but placed on the desktop. The girls crossed their legs in perfect X's. The boys firmly planted their feet on the ground and stared straight ahead. Pencils were no longer tapped, and talking completely ceased. Aizawa watched in shock before glancing at Izuku with anticipation. Izuku seemed to be slightly more relaxed now that the room was completely stuck still and quiet. He was the only one slumped forward, head held up by his hands. He looked dead tired, almost as much as Aizawa did 24/7. Aizawa had heard that the other had a rough night, first fixing the electricity, as if Aizawa hadn't known. He knew everything. And then the toilet. Then later this morning, he had been carried into Recovery Girl with an impaled hand and a broken foot. Clearly that wasn't all that had happened, but Aizawa was too preoccupied trying to puzzle out how exactly he was to defuse the situation. So he started class as normal and avoided asking Midoriya a single question. If the class hadn't been stiff with the atmosphere of tension, Aizawa would have relished the silence. It's always the quiet ones you should be afraid of. Huh. Aizawa muttered as the bell rang, leaning slightly away from Izuku as he passed. Although calmer, the boy still seemed pissed, and Aizawa wasn't willing to go hand and fist with the inheritor of One for All when he was angry. He almost felt bad for the other teachers. Next was President Mike, who, bless his heart, had the tendency to be dumber than a box of rocks and almost as oblivious as one. Even he couldn't ignore the deadly vibes radiating off the male and the uncharacteristic silence from the rest of the class. "Man, he was a brave Kiki," but perhaps not a very smart one, and he soldiered on with his scheduled class like nothing was wrong. He even had the balls to call on Midoriya to answer questions, which the younger got correct with a notable lack of his usual shy stutter. He didn't bother calling on him to present, though, or to carry through the partner activity he had originally planned. It didn't seem like anybody would be able to gather the courage to pair up with Midoriya. The rest of classes went similarly. Izuku was never outright rude, not like Bakugo would be if he wasn't too focused on obeying the very tight guidelines in the hopes of prolonging his own life. But it was clear that something was off. The rest of Class 1A sat very still and very quietly, trying their best to copy whatever Bakugo was doing, since clearly the blonde knew what was going on. If Izuku had a request, it was obeyed as swiftly as Bakugo had obeyed Izuku's request to remove his elbows from his desk. But they didn't know the rules, so everybody avoided him like the plague. Bakugo was tense, wondering if maybe he should just suck it up and give Izuku some company just so he didn't explode from being constantly avoided. It was a delicate situation, though. Approach too early, and he'll die. But approach too late, and they'll all die. Izuku, meanwhile, was getting steadily more and more angry. Now people were avoiding him. Uraraka and Ida had barely spoken to him. Kirishima and Kaminari had practically ran when he passed them. Even Bakugo wasn't bothering him. And for once, Izuku could use the excuse to lose his temper on somebody. But it was lunch finally, and Izuku sighed before sitting down across from Shinso. The insomniac took one look at him and cocked an eyebrow. Dude, it took a shit in your Cheerios. Izuku gave him a tired, wry look, unimpressed with the crude expression. He's heard much better sayings on much better days. It's been a shitty day, Izuku responded, taking a large bite out of his Getsudan. He needed comfort food today. Shinso raised his other eyebrow in surprise as Izuku cussed and dug into the hearty meal in front of him. Everybody knew how dedicated Izuku was to his diet, and to hear a cuss from the other was rare. Something was clearly up, and Shinso couldn't help until he knew what. Clearly. Wanna rant at me? Izuku indulged heavily in the offer, silently thanking Shinso for just nodding along and agreeing with his angry rants. His ranting was normal volume, since he wasn't so far gone as to want to badmouth his classmates loud enough that they could hear him. After his bout of ranting and eating Getsudan simultaneously, Shinso nodded sagely and gave his words of wisdom. Your dorm mates are assholes. Buy a box of Oreos and replace the icing with toothpaste. Put hair bleach in the conditioner so their hair gets streaky. They don't appreciate you enough. Bakugo, who had been eavesdropping to make sure the angry Izuku situation was contained, gave a small fist bump at the insomniac's words. Nice one! It was a good thing Izuku had pulled the male aside to fill him in before Izuku got to the lunchroom. Bakugo could put up without Oreos, and he had his own conditioner that he kept hidden since it was specifically for his hair. He would rather not set his own hair on fire. Thank you very much. As long as Izuku was no longer in a murderous rage. It was also handy to overhear what exactly had put the green-haired male in this mood so that they could all collectively avoid it happening ever again. Lunch ended and it was time for hero training. Izuku wasn't feeling much better, although the rant at Shinso had at least gotten some of his pent-up anger out. If the rest of the day went as smoothly as the morning classes had gone, he'd make it to the afternoon and he could work himself raw in the gym and then go to bed early. Things were looking up. It's not like anything really bad could happen. It was a class run by All Might. However, it seemed the universe was still not done messing with Izuku this fine day. They had barely gotten class started before a purple portal sprung to life right behind Mineta, Shigaraki himself reaching out to snatch the grape kid and grab him by the head.
All Might, I've come to kill you.
Shigaraki cackled, stalking out of the portal with Anomu in tow and Kurogiri following behind. They had few reinforcements. It seemed like this was more of a luxury trip than an attempt on All Might's life.
Let go of my student!
All Might growled, smiled, dying instantly. Everybody waited for Shigaraki to reply, Mineta trembling uselessly in his palms out of fear. However, the class of 1A would have to wait a bit longer for Shigaraki's reply because Izuku had officially hit his limit for the day. Bakugo noticed Izuku's patience snapping before anyone else, and he responded in the way that experience has taught him to do. He ran away. The rest of Class 1A saw him turn tail, and they all peered at Izuku before understanding why and quickly following. At least Izuku finally had a reason to lose his temper. Full cowl rippled through him, and in the blink of an eye, it was springing towards Shigaraki. His left foot swiped, clocking Shigaraki in the jaw right as he opened his mouth to shout in surprise and sending the gray-haired villain flying. Mineta was released, and he followed the rest of Class 1A in their attempts to flee. Izuku did not flee. No. He was going to stay right here and kick the crap out of these guys until he was in a better mood. I've had a bad enough day! Back off! Izuku yelled, turning on his toe and throwing a sharp jab into the Nomu's side. The Nomu, having received no orders yet, didn't react to the incoming punch and was sent flying by the blow. Izuku followed after it, giving All Might taking the opportunity to attempt to round up Shigaraki and Kurogiri. He could scold Midoriya for the cussing later when they weren't currently being attacked by the Villain Alliance. The rest of Class 1A were fighting through the Alliance's lackeys, opening the gym's doors just to find more outside. That explained the lack of them inside the gym. It was clearly meant to be an ambush. Before they had time to worry about fighting through them all, however, Izuku chucked the Nomu across the gym and out the door. The heavy creature slammed into the lackeys, pushing them aside as it slammed through several decorative trees before tearing through UA's border wall. It's only after it hit the ground that one could see that the creature's arms and legs had been torn off at the seconds, leaving only a torso and head. And get the fuck away! Izuku yelled somewhere near the back of the gym. The green-haired male turned to find Shigaraki, who was in the midst of running away from All Might. With another growl, Izuku kicked off the floor and tackled the villain into the sidewall. Of all days, you all had to come today! Izuku growled, raising both fists into the air and slamming them down into Shigaraki's face. Shigaraki let out a scream as his nose was smashed, his teeth cracking and hand covering his face, suffocating and digging into his skin. He reached up to grab onto Izuku's arms in an effort to disintegrate them, but another quick blow to his shoulders had his arms slamming back into the ground hard enough to break them. He screamed again, unused to such extreme pain. He tried to kick the boy, only for Izuku to slam down on his ankles and break those as well. I've been having a shitty fucking day, and you two just had to come and fucking them more, huh? Izuku chuckled darkly, eyes glinting eerily. Shigaraki could easily read those eyes. In any other situation, he would have laughed. This kid would make a great villain if he was pushed in the right direction. It was clear that in the midst of anger, he was capable of tearing things limb from limb. But given that Shigaraki was currently first contender to getting ripped apart like a ragdoll, he was less fond of the near-evil glint in the younger's eyes. Kurogiri, who had had a feeling at the very beginning that this wasn't a very good plan, decided it was time to leave before Midoriya Izuku really did decide to kill Shigaraki. No mortal man could survive what the boy had just subjected their poor Nomu to. There were torn off limbs all around the gym, all belonging to their Nomu. Kurogiri was rather fond of his limbs, as was Shigaraki. He wasn't quite willing to lose them to a high schooler today. No, with that rather pleasant thought in mind, Kurogiri opened a portal and managed to push Izuku off of his young master long enough for Kurogiri to grab him and get them out. Clearly, in the future, they'd have to plan this attack on a day where Izuku was in a much better mood. All Might stared at his young student for a moment, watching the boy breathe heavily before closing his eyes and letting out a long sigh. I needed that, Izuku finally mutters, wincing as he stood up on his legs. But I think I went overboard and snapped my left femur. All Might nodded sagely, deciding it was unwise to push the other any farther. He made a note in the back of his head to buy young Midoriya some ice cream later today, judging from the angry ranting he had overheard while the younger ripped the Nomu apart, which, speaking of, All Might never wanted to get in young Midoriya's way if he could easily do that when he was angry. And kick the crap out of Shigaraki, the green-haired student hadn't had the best of days. Ice cream makes everything better, after all. I never knew Midoriya had such a temper. Todoroki spoke softly hours later when they were all back at the dorms. Izuku was sleeping peacefully upstairs, having gone to bed in a much better mood. The rest of the class was gathered in the living room discussing the events of the day. Bakugo shrugged, a wry glance fixed on the ceiling above them. Izuku should be right above them. He hoped the green-haired boy was in a better mood tomorrow. Bakugo really hated wearing ties. Yeah, and you thought I was bad. He chuckled. I learned a long time ago that you don't fuck with an angry Midoriya.
It was a good lesson.
Class 1A swore to themselves they'd never forget it. End of The Time Izuku Was in a Shitty Mood by Caradwen Angtueri. If you enjoyed this recording or the content, feel free to leave a comment below or a review at the original story from the link in the description. Thank you for listening.